I'm excited to really the intention here with this little adventure is to go into women's health, and I think that's there's men and there's women, and so over half the population's women, and we want to make sure that we really specialize a focus on how to engage in women's health, and I think there's a lot of facets to women's health, and so Jenny, when you think of women's health as a woman, what do you think of?
Mysterious and often complex, because as women, there's like an intuitive nature as well, where
Mm,
have this nurturing type of skill set that's innately dialed in, and I feel like our sensitivity to life and its stressors can maybe hit us a little bit harder than men. No judgment, but there's a lot to juggle of being a mom, being an employee, or just trying to do the best you can, wearing many hats. And often I feel like the sub theme is nurture the nurturer for me, is
mm,
that we often just go 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 and leave our own thoughts of self-care and how to create balance in our lives last on the list.
mm.
It has to be after dinner's done and the dishes are done and all of that stuff. And sometimes you don't get around to it. And so that there's just like a cumulative effects of not knowing what your hormones are up to
Mm.
as your life stages change. So I like to think about and honor all stages that women have to go through: the maiden, the mother, the crone, because it's all regulated by this mysterious hormone magic behind the scenes, and the endocrine system, which is even
Mhm.
more mysterious.
I think in a lot of ways, when I think of women's health, I think how the body puts together the female condition. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful. I mean, males, for all the male listeners, we don't have it as great as they do. But that also leads for a lot of opportunities for nourishment, right? And
Right.
how do we support that cycle, which, is innate, I think, even to men and, males listening, we do have our innate cycle that we go through, but it's more on like a daily basis.
Right.
And we all have fluctuations in life stressors, but when we're looking at supplemental strategies and lifestyle strategies to complement women's health, it's how do you very much so be in tune with that cyclical nature that is innate to the female condition and honor that, right?
Right.
And I think, there's so much power that, I would really encourage our listeners that, female listeners to engage in because they can harness that
Right.
cycle and,
It
and
doesn't
really
have to be
it
miserable.
doesn't have to be miserable, and it actually, I personally think every female on the planet has a superpower
Yes, we
that they,
do. We bleed and don't die. We bleed and don't die. I
and
I I will say that a million times because I find that a superpower.
right, and giving life and bringing life in this world, and also those hormonal fluctuations, they should not be feared, but cultivated and harvested to use to better empower themselves to live a more healthy life. And so when we're looking at supplemental strategies, there's a lot of different ways that we can go, right? Jenny, what would you
Well,
what do
I
you
feel
think of?
like some of the when women begin their menstrual cycle and hormones and things start to change, it can become a roller coaster
Mm,
emotionally with just the hormone fluctuations. And then, it may even I've heard some women say that, they rather just skip all of that or suppress the period. And
mm,
it's part of our excretory system in terms of this whole cycle of just shedding and releasing what is not needed and then rebuilding. And that happens every month,
mm,
every moon cycle. So I find that it's about, like you said, honoring that rhythm and trying to find where the missteps or the stumbles are
mm,
in your monthly cycle and try to nourish it first rather than medicate it with, we all have choices for taking medications on certain journeys, but
mm,
it's if you decide to get on birth control pills, it's can be difficult getting off when you
mhm,
decide you're done with it. And so it's just about getting to know yourself and knowing that it's a cycle that you have to reflect on, walk with, like walk through the fire, get on the other side, take lots of bubble baths, drink hot teas. But nourishment through supplementation can often be the missing link because diets are deficient, soils are deficient. There's like cumulative, our bodies are hungry for things that we can't fill those gaps fast enough,
mhm,
it seems. And sometimes, you know, things like magnesium, which we've talked about before, are missing links in PMS management, for
mm,
example,
mhm.
so.
Well, I think and that's where, always with any supplemental protocol, if you're working with hormones or working with factors, you
Absolutely.
always want to make sure you're working with, either a qualified health professional through premier research labs or, your own personal physician. But, when we start to think about where the missteps can be, right, with, the hormonal chains and analogs that really, drive the health system for the female, you know, we kind of talked about the bubble baths and, life, but stress in a lot of ways can be one of those
Yes.
kind of conduits that, wrecks the system, right? Cortisol.
And it doesn't
Um,
seem like we can get away from it.
no,
Modern life is very stressful.
we do. And so, there's a couple products that kind of come to mind from Premier Research Labs offering, we have a product called Radiant Woman, and
Mm.
it's a beautiful name, but it also has two clinically studied ingredients, LJ100 and labimafim, which actually work to manage kind of the hormonal cascade within the female reproductive cycle, but they more so target cortisol actually.
Mm.
And that's, what I found so interesting in terms of where we've had really good feedback is, LJ100 coming in and helping to dampen kind of that cortisol response so that the other hormonal analogs can really start to operate in the best condition that they
Right.
can.
Right.
And then, of course, with labimafim, that clinically studied ingredient actually working to suppress the testosterone conversion to DHT. And so you actually have more androgens in circulation, which a lot of people, and a lot of women probably think
Oh
with
no, we don't want
we don't
that.
want
Right.
androgens, but actually that helps with a lot of symptoms and fatigue and just energy levels. And so, and we're talking about metabolism and weight loss. So, implementing that product into a protocol where, perhaps they are overly stressed, right? And
Mhm.
they're finding that their life, they're not able to really harness that in or rein that in.
Right.
That's a great product to implement,
And
right?
would you say that is more for which phase of womanhood? Or
Mm,
like what, like Radiant Woman is
yeah.
so I was yeah, I'll let you answer that before my
Yeah, I
next
mean, and
question comes.
it's typically a perimenopause, menopausal
Mhm.
based product,
Mhm.
but using at very small doses, especially with a practitioner's kind of keen insight, to dose that or titrate that in. If you're doing any kinesiologic modality or doing any type of energetic testing, you can kind of see how the body responds to that, right?
Right.
But typically, just based on the claims, we like to say, if you're nearing the end of the normal, cycle, and more into that menopausal
Right.
phase of life.
That's where I'm at. So, and
um,
based on that product, I was, getting to know PRL's supplement line and Libafem LJ100. I'm like, oh, Libafem is fenugreek seed
mm,
standardized extract, which has been patented and clinically studied. And so it's nice to like know that these are herbs that are just have been taken to the next level in
right.
terms of their clinical efficacy, and that LJ100 is great for men and women, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
the Tongkat
Um,
Ali,
yeah.
which is
It's the Muhammad
Malaysian
Ali of
ginseng.
yeah.
Malaysian is like a very traditional medicine that's helps with libido lifting.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
we as well as other things. I mean, there's just but it can be a rough ride right before things, dry up.
Yeah, and typically with cycle, and this is just my familiarity and kind of like how the hormones change. You typically have a spike of androgens, during your cycle, and then kind of around maybe when you're actually doing the shedding, there may be another small spike of androgens as well. But you can also have cortisol rising very dramatically
Mm,
around that time with the hormonal drop, and so
doesn't sound fun.
doesn't sound fun. And so, sometimes having kind of that nutritive buffer in the body to kind of help manage how those hormones are dissipating or
Mm,
responding,
that's a good description. Buffers are good.
yeah, it can really
Mhm.
kind of help to support that. And so, another product that comes to mind in terms of just hormonal kind of management or more shepherding, right? Kind of helping, because, the beauty of herbs and botanicals is we're not giving a direct pharmaceutical analog into the body that's forcing the body in a certain direction.
Right. The body recognizes it's nature-based.
Right. We're
Mhm.
giving it nice little bumpers to operate more efficiently. Right. And so, another product that, comes to mind is estrafulone in our arsenal.
Mm, mhm.
That's going to be a DIM based product, right? Based off cruciferous vegetables. But I know, Jenny, you like the DIM. You want to talk about
Well,
maybe a little
actually,
bit?
I would say I had an experience
Oh, you
with
had the DIM.
DIM.
That's right.
So, DIM and I are I'm trying to come around to it's because I had a thyroid issue that
Mm,
I had a maybe not the best experience with DIM
mm,
the first time.
yeah.
But So I don't know if I'm like the spokesperson for it, but I'm
And
interested in knowing
I
about
think,
that.
yeah, and I think there's reasons to use dim and to not use dim,
Correct.
right?
It's not one size fits all
It
ever.
it's not, no, and I think, when you have an over conversion, and this is where, there's could be a lot of different facets as it turns to thyroid, and we'll talk about thyroid here briefly into women's health shortly, but you can have basically an over conversion of hormonal analogs into the wrong category, right? So, and androgens actually converting to more estrogens, right? And that's where you typically have a aromatase action that maybe is over, worked or over engaged, and that's causing your body to actually produce more estrogens that is not actually beneficial, right? And
Right.
maybe shifting your hormonal load into the wrong direction. This is where DIM can actually be very beneficial. DIM's also got great
Right,
detoxification
exactly.
pathways and just,
It's about xenoestrogens or like
mhm.
clearing harmful things. Too much of a good thing
Yeah,
from
but
the wrong
maybe
sources.
maybe for those that are listening, because I think this actually gives a great segue into the other facet of hormonal health with women, especially with the thyroid, which comes under so much burden from
Mm,
environmental toxins and pollutants. But
absolutely.
talk to us a little bit about your DIM experience and how you would maybe help.
Well, story time. To reveal a little bit about it, had some cervical dysplasia when I
Mhm.
was like in my early 20s, and that was the protocol I was suggested to take DIM, and it was a standardized extract. And so, it would have been maybe if they told me to eat a lot of cabbage and broccoli, maybe I would have been okay. But this very potent substance was actually suppressing my thyroid function. Like
Mm,
I felt more anxious, and
mm,
even though like the dysplasia cleared, it kind of peeled the layers of my onion back
mm,
to see that there was some imbalance, and I did more tests and found I had autoimmune or Hashimoto's, and so it just became an awareness of that. Not everybody knows my body but me, in terms of like just people thinking, oh, well, clinically tested, this must work,
mm,
but it like, and then you gave that example of, like, I call it the snowflake effect, where we all are different, and you
mm.
really have to have the guidance of an ally practitioner that can tune in to what you've got going on all
Oh,
levels.
yeah.
And, and then just what is your exposure like? Do you have to like use Roundup? Are you a landscaper and that's just part of your daily thing? And that's, it's just cumulative damage. We have so much coming at us, and our body doesn't always know how to get rid of it, so we hold on to it and in our fat, and we feel toxic, and then you take a sauna and you feel worse because there wasn't anything in your body to bind it and clear it.
Yeah.
You like let all the bad guys out of your fat cells, and then you got a whole other problem.
Mm,
You have
mhm.
to like liberate them and then clear them. So
Yeah,
it's just like this whole, it's complex, like I said.
it is.
So, I'm not against DIM. I've learned a lot more about it, but in the process, learned more about myself.
And that, a lot of times that's the nutritive journey. And I think when you're talking about women's health, I think that's the most empowering message is really learn to love your own cycle, love where you are at life, and love how you can better harness and empower yourself to be your very best version with everything else that's going on, right? Everybody's got
Right.
their own story and there's so much that's going on in everyday life. And I think there was a really good point that you made with the, uncovering the layers,
Yes.
right? And a lot of
Yes.
people, that's why, maybe we started this conversation at the precipice of hormones. Everybody thinks
Right.
of hormones, but really, when you peel back the layer of what drives hormonal health, it's all the other and all the other systems that go along with that, and
Mhm.
the thyroid being one of those. And a lot of people don't realize how important having a good iodine source in their diet, especially to promote hormonal health, but to promote thyroid health is super important. And one of the best products we have in our arsenal is Xenostat.
Right. I
And
find that fascinating.
it's fascinating. And there's just so much that the thyroid does to drive. And it's more of a driver, in my opinion, of like how the body is responding and then actually cultivating different hormonal
And
elements.
I love that it's
Kelp
kelp
based,
based,
right?
because kelp is just like a fantastic botanical that's not only helping nourish you, it's clearing out. It
Mm.
has these detoxification compounds, right? The alginin. I don't know all of its, I can't remember all of that part right now, but I know that it's nutritive and cleansing.
Hmm.
It's a great twofer.
And we've seen a lot of, I mean, it can be used kind of in both of those capacities. I mean, a lot of our physicians with Premier, they've used it both as a detoxification aid, so actually helping to flush the thyroid, right? You think of fluoride components and
Yes.
actually how that can
Yes.
clog the thyroid.
Yes.
Are different, you can have even some xenoestrogens or other different components, environmental pollutants. You have, just all those different components to plastics that can potentially
Yes.
just impair it,
Styrofoam.
right?
What are we doing?
And so,
Right.
having a really good source of iodine that's flushing those receptors, allowing that to actually have a appropriate responsivity, right? Because the thyroid sometimes cannot, it can be getting all the nutrients, but it can't actually be responding to the signals that are coming down. And
Because
then
it's bogged
you're,
down
yeah.
or
And so you essentially have this interlay that is not relaying that to the rest of the body. And so then you're going to get metabolic dysfunction, which can cascade into that hormonal dysfunction that then leaves people thinking it's a hormonal problem, right?
right.
But it's actually a thyroid problem, right?
Right.
I think, looking at a xenostat in that nature as a potential, first and foremost, everybody needs to be getting iodine, and they should not be getting a synthetic iodine, in my opinion.
I agree. I tried that. Horrible experience.
Right.
Horrible.
You want something that's fully nutritive, that has that whole botanical whole food matrix that really supports and nourishes all the additional layers and provides all those different, subderivatives along with the iodine component to support, health in general, right? And
Right.
I think that's the power of whole food, and that's what we love here at Premier Research Labs.
Right. I agree. I think that's a very honorable like standard across our product line is high quality food based it's full of nature's best stuff.
Hmm.
And that's what we have to get back to.
It is. And so, we talk about cycle health, and we kind of talk about, there's kind of the younger years, I guess, of, women's health. And then you have the later stages of women's health, the menopausal era. And I always think, where DHEA,
DHEA is mysterious, so I would like to hear more about that.
yeah, I mean, it is it is essentially an analog. It's a mother hormone, I guess, of all other
Is it a
hormones.
precursor
Precursor, right?
to
To
progesterone or to all of them?
basically, you're getting a precursor to the more the androgens or the estrogens, right? And so it can kind of be shepherded along the hormonal cascade based on what the body's needing. By supplementing that, though, and a lot of times we're not producing enough DHEA for environmental reasons or age or just kind of
Mhm.
degradation of those systems due to chronic stress. And so, I always look at DHEA as a potential supplemental offering at the later stages, kind of in that menopausal era, to potentially fill in that androgen
But
gap.
what would that look like? Like, when would you say, "Oh, you it's DHEA?" Like, is it an excess of dryness? Is it an excess of hot flashes or feeling
Yeah,
absolutely miserable?
I
Or
I usually look more at like a vitality spectrum. So, especially when a practitioner is looking to maybe implement DHEA into a protocol, it's kind of at the, when they're not feeling that they have that energy, they're not feeling that they're having the ability to maybe perform at the levels that they want as a woman. They don't have that desire, right?
yeah.
And so, you're kind of having that gap and kind of that almost emotional space and physiological space where you just don't feel like you have that drive and
It's
and
not a pleasant
not a
feeling.
pleasant feeling, no. And I think we all go through that. We all have different, phases in life, but if it's a consistent kind of, dragging, maybe there's a supplemental option to bring in to kind of help to give it a little bit more gasoline in the engine, so to speak, so that it actually can start to maybe uplift different areas. There can be long-term supplemental strategies. I also strongly encourage, how can you get endogenous production of those metabolites in the body just by essentially doing whole food strategies, lifestyle augmentations, right? But in total, there may be a scenario where the body just can't produce that anymore.
Right, and I think I read somewhere that ideally, because it's kind of a very specific use for DHEA, like, you wanna maybe test blood levels first or
Yeah.
get an idea of the levels that
And
you're at I
And
mean
I never, like I said, I'm always one of the mindset to encourage a practitioner, physician, or a consumer to look first at the base layers of health, right? So we're looking at the organ gland systems, we're looking at the nutritive components, right? So like, what's the foundational nutrition layer of the individual? And then we can go into the more, maybe it's the more biologically active components of an herbal or botanical derivative, like the DIMs, right?
Mhm.
Maybe even the LJ100s, the libimafems of the world, right? That are potent extracts that, have a little bit more of a physiological steering
Right.
of the body.
Mhm.
But then if all else fails and you've kind of supported those base layers and we've tried all these different derivatives, okay, well now we can
Right. I see.
toss in
I
a
see what you mean. So
DHEA
you
or
kinda, like, build
but you're
up.
not needing maybe a momentous amount of DHEA, right? You're maybe only needing 25 milligrams or 50 milligrams, which the Premier DHA is a great option to evaluate to potentially implement because you've already gotten the body to a sensitivity level to handle that more effectively.
Right.
And so I think a lot of people, when they're looking at hormones and when they're looking at empowering, whether it's women's health or men's health, they go straight for the heavy hitter.
Right. More is always better somehow.
More is always
And it
better.
it just doesn't, I feel like we gotta take care of our snowflakes and start slow and steady.
Yeah.
You don't wanna melt.
And so, kind of last along that list in regards to kind of the hormonal health spectrum and like strategies of like increasing vitality, which is actually more natural option and is completely humane, I might add, because a lot of people when they hear deer antler, they're like, "Oh my gosh, what
Oh,
happened to the
right.
deer?"
New Zealand deer antler.
New
Yeah,
Zealand
New
deer
Zealand
antler.
red velvet deer
Um,
antler. Right.
there's so many benefits. It works more on the androgenic level, but it's going to support hormonal levels globally. The compounds in that actually help to think of them as being phytonutrients for hormonal production or just synthesis. Also, you're looking at how it works with inflammation in the body, right? So, like prostaglandins,
Mhm.
like cascades in terms of how the body actually has a inflammation-based reaction, which when we talk about inflammation, I also talk about cortisol in a lot of ways and stress and inflammation being kind of the stress space. And so
Mhm.
like if you have poor prostaglandin signaling in the body, you could have poor metabolic reactions throughout the body from a global level in a different place, which then may lead to hormonal deficits, right? And so our New Zealand deer antlers humanely harvested. The deer shed antlers annually.
Right.
You don't have to harm the deer to get the antlers. And then you have a nice little fuzz that comes with the deer antler. And that actually is what is utilized and basically dried and put into a capsule. And then you're getting all these different biologically active
I find
ingredients.
it fascinating because I think it comes from its use in traditional medicine systems and
Yeah, very TCM based
right,
and been
we're
used for eons I mean, it's more to promote the essence, the core
right, the
essence,
Jing,
the Jing
right,
essence
yes, the
of
essence of our vitality,
correct. And
which dries up as we
it
get older.
does, right?
You wanna be juicy for as long as possible, so, just not only for, your sexual well-being, but who wants to be dried out?
Well, it kind of makes sense that you're getting that from a buck that,
Right, that's what I mean is kind of I feel like there's, like, a lot of that consideration and the many people are very against, the use of animal products in supplements, but again, this is nothing that's hurting the animal, and I was curious, so I went down the rabbit hole and felt better coming out, especially because our sourcing is so pristine and very, careful. So anyway, it's a
yeah.
mysterious,
But I
but
always
powerful supplement.
like with the DHEA conversation, I would actually, bringing that in even or like bringing the New Zealand deer antler in earlier as a strategy prior to the even DHEA use, because you might
I think
find,
that's probably a good idea, right? Because
cultivating that Jing essence more, providing those different phytoactive compounds from the deer antler might help from a hormonal space to actually kind of support, okay, well now we have those bumpers in place more effectively. We're
right.
able to manage hormonal production more effectively. We have the phytonutrients that really helps the body in that kind
And
of
good
metabolic
way to
production.
clear the bad stuff
Correct.
too, like
But last, but and I can't believe we almost, we've kind of gone through a whole conversation on, six flagship products of, women's health, but one of our flagship products that I think it's called Fem Balance. It
I
has
love
female
that.
balance in the
Right,
name, right?
right.
Chastry Vitex is the main ingredient of that
Yes.
formula,
Chase tree
and
berry,
yeah,
yeah. Mhm.
You want to talk a little bit about Chase Tree?
Well, it is a fabulous Vitex grows here in the Central Texas, and it is a long has a long history of use in European herbal medicine, and just now everybody seems to know about it. And I kind of look at it as a medicine for any life phase of
Mhm.
womanhood. Maiden, mother, crone. There's so much that happens, but Vitex seems to be able to modulate the hypothalamus, pituitary, ovarian axis, HPO axis. We hear a lot about HPA, but when I was exploring Vitex, they emphasized the fact that this particular system of balance that Vitex helps facilitate is pretty powerful but gentle.
Mhm.
And a lot of people get great benefits from anything from PMS or PCOS or irregular menses. It just seems to bring rhythm back to cycles. And you tell me more.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most raved, reviewed products. I think any female employee at Premier Research Labs has seen the benefits of, Fem Balance. But,
Hmm.
I think a lot of our practitioners and physicians also know just implementing that into any phase of the cycle, right? Whether it's a lower dose or a higher dose, depending on kind of how you are moving through the cycle, especially later on when you have a lot of hormonal changes and fluctuations, especially near menses,
Hmm.
adding more of that chastity might help to manage those PMS symptoms,
Right.
so that
It
you,
definitely. I've been using that since the Maiden years.
yeah, and so I think it's one of the most widely used products for cycle health, especially for a younger female. But especially as you get close to perimenopause, including that more regularly in your regime can kind of help. It's another one of those shepherding
And
products.
buffers the uncomfortable stuff.
Correct.
Hmm.
And, I think when we talk about the rituals and kind of just how the body, changes over time, you don't want to go to extremes, right? And I think maybe if nothing else, this kind of conversation helps to allude how, nutrition and whole foods can kind of help to manage that and keep that contained, right? We want to make it a,
Nurture the nurturer.
yeah,
Comes back to
make it a
that.
beautiful picture that's within its own frame, not necessarily expanding into the other frames
Right.
of the world. So,
Right.
um, but any other kind of thoughts that your wisdom you'd like
Well,
to
do
share?
you feel that these products are already synergistic in each formulation in terms of having key active ingredients and then a blend of botanicals that helps kind of make the magic happen even more efficiently?
Mm.
Um, do you find that many of these work together? Like in your practice, do you see people pairing these for optimal, like you were saying, New Zealand deer antler
Mhm.
could be helpful with Radiant Woman, or
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of our products, the beauty of the Premier system, I would say, is we add nutritive layers. Because we're an excipient-free manufacturer,
yes,
we're
yes.
providing whole foods along with a lot of these active ingredients we've more so talked to here. But we also really believe in building a system around. So it's not a standalone product, but if you're experiencing extreme PMS symptoms, right, and you want to better manage that, I typically recommend looking at Fem Balance, but then, potentially actually looking maybe to control androgen levels later on in the cycle. So maybe there's some estrogen, maybe not
Estro
estrofl,
mhm.
maybe not estroflavone, but like green tea.
Right.
Actually, green tea is a great way to manage androgens.
Mhm.
So we didn't even talk about like a green tea extract. But maybe you find that you're actually experiencing a high level of stress, and so, that would be where Radiant Woman would come in, right? And you're
Right.
doing a lot low dose or maybe a medium dose of Radiant Woman along with the Fem Balance. And then maybe you find when your hormones tank, especially around menses, maybe that's when you actually maybe need a little bit of the New Zealand deer antler, right? To
Right.
kind of help cultivate that gene essence. And then as hormones kind of come back online, right? That's natural female cycle. You start to titrate off that, and now you're just looking to manage kind of that system so it stays within bounds. And green tea is one of my favorite. we don't
I
we
know.
don't have it, but
It's
it's one of
not
my
part of our core promo for women's health, but I see that it's a missing element. I believe research is also showing that it can be very helpful for uterine fibroids, and that's extremely painful for women.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of scare of surgeries and all these, you just feel like your body's attacking you, so
Mhm.
it's nice to know that plants are still out there and coming in through supplements and very carefully crafted formulas that can help you get through stuff that doesn't seem like anybody else has answers to.
I agree. I mean, and there's so that's why I love the field of nutritional sciences and this industry because we really get to provide an understanding of how a lot of this innate wisdom for centuries has been along, but how it's actually mechanistically working in the body to support the manifestation of health outcomes that we're looking for. And so,
Right.
I think it's really exciting. I think the beauty of our mission and our philosophy is that we're really empowering whole foods to bring up the innate potential of each
Right.
individual, and that goes into female cycle health and beyond. So um,
Absolutely.
I just
Well,
want to thank, yeah, I think that's a good conclusion and stopping point, but I think this conversation probably could go on many more
there's
iterations
so
and
many questions I'm sure women have that, they just want all options. They want
Mhm.
options
Yeah.
other than medications.
And I think, empower the innate wisdom within your cycle and really look to support each phase of it. I mean, each day is a new day, and how can you make the best of that day? And
Mhm.
in my mind, it's what nutritive strategies can you use to complement that? And so, I just want to thank
And
every.
you'll only be better for it,
Yeah,
in
exactly.
terms of like you said, because we care about what goes in, the excipient free thing is huge
Hmm.
because it's the what you don't see or the other ingredients that might be doing very subtle things that don't make you feel good optimally. But
Yeah,
anyway,
we'll have to
very
do a
good experiences with the products.
whole conversation on pesticides, aflatoxins, mold, and
Oh,
how
please.
that can
That's a little
impair
depressing
female
right
health
now.
and just every yeah. So, I just want to thank everybody for listening in, and Jenny, it's a
Oh, thank
pleasure
you.
to
Thank
do
you.
that.
It's
And
always nice to talk about wellness.
yeah, so thanks for everybody for joining the Living Well podcast, and we look forward to
Premier
tuning into
living.
Premier Living. One day I'll get
It's okay.
that.
It's okay. There's more to come, and we're just gonna get better and better at what we share and
Thanks
what
for
we celebrate and how we can build community.
thanks for joining everybody.
Thank you.
Between the stress at the office and juggling my kids' soccer schedule, my energy was running on empty. Then, I found Premier Research Labs, and they've been trusted by health practitioners for more than 35 years. Now, I have the energy I had 10 years ago. I'm finally sleeping through the night, and with their digestive support, I've even shed a few pounds. Plus, Premier Research Labs products are made in the U.S. with top-quality natural ingredients and cutting-edge science. I found them on Amazon, but you can learn more about them if you visit prlabs.com today and start your journey to feeling your best.